Qui doit remplacer M. Johnston, selon vous? Est-ce que ça peut faire l'unanimité de la Chambre, ce choix-là, maintenant?
Bien, on va voir. Je pense que M. Leblanc a été clair au cours des derniers jours, évidemment, qu'on remercie M. Johnston du travail qu'il a fait. C'était un travail qui a été fait dans des conditions difficiles et malheureusement un peu partisanes. Alors, on tourne la page, on le remercie, puis on va voir avec les partis d'opposition qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire à partir de maintenant.
Mais là, l'enquête publique, ça semble la solution pour vous? On ne peut pas l'éviter, cette enquête-là?
Mais M. Johnston avait déjà statué là-dessus. Maintenant qu'il est parti, comme mon collègue M. Leblanc le dit, bien, on est ouvert à d'autres possibilités, mais il faut maintenant retirer le caractère extrêmement partisan de cette discussion pour s'élever. Et ça demande évidemment une collaboration avec tous les partis, y compris les partis d'opposition.
Ne sommes-nous pas de retour à la case départ maintenant que M. Johnston est parti? On dirait qu'on aurait pu... on est de retour à il y a 2 mois.
Non, parce que M. Johnston a quand même fait un travail solide, dont les recommandations sont connues, sont publiques. Il a dit beaucoup de choses que les gens ne savaient pas il y a quelques semaines à peine. Donc son travail a été important et apprécié. Maintenant, on se tourne vers la suite.
On peut trouver quelqu'un d'ici la fin de la session?
Merci.
Qui va remplacer M. Johnston? Est-ce que ça doit se faire en collaboration avec tous les partis d'opposition?
Mais regarde, je peux dire que M. Johnston demeure un candidat de très haut renommée et regarde, comme M. le ministre Leblanc a dit, c'est maintenant aux partis d'opposition de travailler ensemble pour trouver si c'est une personne ou plusieurs qui peuvent mener la prochaine étape.
C'est aux partis d'opposition?
Mais c'est en toute collaboration avec tous les partis.
Some of the opposition members say they want a decision before Parliament rises. That's happening soon. Do you think it's possible?
It's up to the House leaders and the actual leaders. So the leaders and the leaders of all the parties need to come together and figure out whether this is one person or many people who would lead whatever the next step is. And that's clearly a conversation that I hope the party leaders are having. But it's very clear that after Mr. Johnston stepped down, he remains an eminent Canadian, and the toxicity level that was brought to this issue has led us to where we are now. And so I hope the party leadership of all the parties can find a way forward.
So will this be a decision made with all the House leaders?
I think it's actually the leaders of the party as opposed to the House leaders, but it's all interconnected, and we've got to bring the temperature in the House down. We've got important work to do on behalf of Canadians, and wrestling to the ground foreign interference is a big part of that.
Est-ce que ça peut se faire d'ici la fin de l'année, de la session?
Entièrement dans les mains des chefs des partis.
Mais croyez-vous, qu'on puisse sortir, que justement la température baisse d'ici la fin de la session sur ce sujet-là, qu'on s'entende?
Mais on sait toujours qu'en juin, c'est un peu la saison folle ici au Parlement, mais cette fois-ci, c'est un peu plus bête que normal. Et pour moi, avoir une direction dans la température ici dans la Chambre des communes serait bon pour le travail qu'il faut qu'on fasse et bon pour les Canadiens.
On va changer de majorité suffisante.
Est-ce que M. Johnston est remplaçable?
Remplaçable, c'est difficile à dire. Écoutez, moi, je vais entendre cet après-midi ce qu'il va dire à la période de questions. On va voir ce que M. Leblanc communique avec nous. Là, il nous a donné l'initiative de la communication, mais on attend d'avoir un petit peu plus d'instructions avant de répondre à ça.
M. Blanchet disait, j'ai une courte liste de noms qui pourraient remplir. Est-ce qu'il y a de ces noms que vous pouvez nous partager?
Donc, pour l'instant, on a une courte liste. La liste n'est pas définitive. On va la rendre publique plus tard, aujourd'hui ou demain.
OK. Qu'est-ce qu'il devrait avoir qu'est-ce que cette personne-là devrait avoir?
Bien, moi, j'ai souvent dit que M. Johnston avait la crédibilité, mais pas la légitimité. Alors, je crois que la personne doit être crédible, légitime. C'est sûr qu'elle doit avoir une certaine connaissance, soit du monde juridique, soit du monde de la Chine, soit du monde des enquêtes. Donc, moi, j'ai toujours dit que c'est pas nécessairement un juge, mais c'est probablement un juge, mais pas nécessairement. Alors, il faudra voir, mais je pense qu'on est à une phase où ça va être difficile de recruter quelqu'un, considérant tout ce qui s'est passé avec M. Johnston. Puis j'espère que ça n'empêchera pas d'éminentes personnes de pouvoir combler le poste.
Maybe Mendès?
So, do you have a short list? What does this person need?
Okay, well, first of all, I think that they need credibility, which Mr. Johnston had until he took that position. But it also needs legitimacy. And I think that these two qualities will make for a better person to lead this inquiry.
How hard do you think it'll be to get consensus, and how fast can that even happen now that this has already been 3 or 4 months?
Well, I think, first of all, it'll be a position that will be hard to fill, considering what happened before. But also, I think we all have in consideration the fact that it needs to be filled before the end of the session. That's one of the terms that we've put together. We've always been at that place on this one.
But it'll be hard. In a week or two.
Yes, we are working on a list. We do have a list. We'll make it public a bit later. We're still working on the list. But we took contact with the other parties, and this is something that we'll have to deal together.
Merci beaucoup.
Je vous en prie. Bonne journée.
Merci.
How important is it consensus with the opposition when it comes to David Johnston's replacement?
Well, certainly helpful. That certainly is. You know, I think that I don't know if we have to throw people into volcanoes or something to prove that they're absolutely lily pure, but yeah, no, I think that it would be very helpful. I mean, what we've witnessed in the last number of weeks has been vile, to be honest with you, and who would want the job? You know, that's going to be a challenge.
The opposition still says they want this public inquiry, but as you just said, it's going to be a challenge to find somebody. So how difficult do you think it'll be to find somebody to lead the public inquiry if that's where the government decides?
Well, I think a lot of it really is depending on what kind of inquiry they want to go. If they want to go back and cover the same ground that David Johnston covered, then whoever does it has to have all the security clearance and have to face the reality that a lot of things that went into David Johnston's report will still have to remain confidential. So, you know, who do you talk to? Well, we can't say. What did they tell you? Well, we can't say. But if the focus of the inquiry is to look forward, what do we do next? How do we insulate ourselves from the kind of interference that and coercion and other things that have happened? Well, okay, that's a much broader, out in the open kind of discussion that we can have. And I think Mr. Johnston had a very good outline for that kind of a public inquiry. The Canada-China Committee, which I chair, put out a report a couple of weeks ago that really sets the table for the sort of things that we can do and should do.
So given the work that Johnston's done, given the work that the committee has done, where would you like to see this process go now?
Well, I'd certainly like to see a look-forward process, to go back, who knew what, when, why, how, etc., etc. That doesn't do anything about what we need to do tomorrow to make sure that our elections remain as basically free of interference as they really have been all along. But, you know, the concerns have been raised. Let's deal with those concerns and let's fix whatever gaps we identify.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you think that there's going to be agreement on who replaces Johnston? Do you think that's going to be possible?
Possible? Yes. Is it going to happen? I have no idea. I can't even guess.
What kind of person do you think needs to take over this next role?
Somebody who gets a consensus of everyone, and I thought Mr. Johnston would be that person. Apparently not, so I don't know. I really don't know.
Thank you. Who do you think would replace Johnston?
Be up to the Prime Minister and the leaders of the opposition.
Do you think it's going to be possible to find consensus with the opposition parties on who replaces him?
If they're genuine in terms of what they're trying to achieve, it can be possible. But again, what is the objective? Let's hope that the objective is the common one.
Est-ce que ça va être difficile pour faire ça?
Je pense que si tout le monde est en accord avec l'objectif de combattre la gérance étrangère, on peut faire des choses. Mais il faut qu'on enlève la partisanerie.
Merci.
Merci.
Before taking your questions, I'd like to first provide an update on the state of affairs with regards to Ontario First Nations policing. Over the course of the weekend, I had an opportunity to have a very constructive conversation with Chief Kai Liu, who brought to my attention the community's perspectives and concerns with regards to the state of dialogue between the Government of Canada and Ontario First Nations when it comes to policing. I want to begin by saying that on the basis of the conversation that I had with him, I'm not satisfied with the state of negotiations. I believe that a number of their concerns, in fact, have merit, which is why I've now become directly engaged with the community, and I've instructed my department to find solutions quickly so that we can resolve any ongoing issues with regards to the flow of monies to the community. Specifically, I have issued a letter and in the process of communicating in very clear terms to them that we want to see funds flowing on a 90-day interim basis so that we can then get back to the table in good faith and find solutions in the long term for this community. It's a reminder that there are challenges when it comes to reconciliation, but we are committed as a government to doing the hard work with communities, and that relationship has to be based on trust and respect. Donc, j'ai une très importante conversation avec le chef Kai Liu, qui est le chef représentatif des Autochtones, de la communauté autochtone dans Ontario, qui représente les intérêts des services policiers. Il m'exprimait quelques concerns, quelques inquiétudes sur le status de la négociation. C'est des préoccupations que je partageais avec lui. Après ça, j'avais géré et mettre des instructions à mon ministère pour trouver une solution aussitôt que possible, Et on va continuer dans un esprit de bonne foi parce que ça, c'est exactement le chemin de réconciliation obligé.
So can you guarantee Minister Brown leaving on the retirement of Justice Brown today? What's your reaction?
I just saw the news. It's obviously a decision that he took, and beyond that, we'll reflect on it. Look, the Supreme Court of Canada is a pillar of our democracy. It provides an incredibly important function by writing about the principles of the law and the Charter. It has very direct implications on day-to-day life when it comes to Canadians. It's a court of final resort and appeal, but just as digesting the news now.
Est-ce que c'était la chose à faire de démissionner dans ce contexte-là?
Pardon?
Est-ce que c'était la chose à faire de démissionner dans ce contexte-là?
Seulement savent qui était rapporté dans le public. C'est une décision personnellement de le juge Russell, ça je comprends de la mise à jour plus tôt aujourd'hui, mais l'institution de la Cour suprême est une institution essentielle dans notre démocratie. Il publie des décisions qui ont vraiment un impact à la vie quotidienne canadienne, donc on va voir qu'est-ce que c'est les prochaines étapes.
What expertise do you think is missing then with his departure from the court?
I'm sorry?
What expertise would you think, what vacancy does that leave? What is it that the government should look to fill?
Well, there are a number of factors that go into nominating Supreme Court judges. Obviously, we're looking for people with the highest qualifications when it comes to being jurists, whether they come from...
I don't mean generally, I mean specifically Russell Brown left and takes a big chunk of expertise with him. What gap do you think is left?
Well, first, I think he brings a regional perspective from the West. That's an important factor. I think also that there's a substantive quality that he brings to his work in terms of the decisions that he's issued that touch on privacy and individual rights and how they are applied to Canadians, as I was saying earlier. There are a lot of factors that go into this decision, and each and every time there is a vacancy that opens up on the Supreme Court, it's an opportunity for the government to first understand what the needs of the court are, but equally to be sure that the individual brings, again, the highest qualifications with regards to the law and ability to be able to communicate what are very complex legal principles in a way that is accessible. I think that is an increasingly important value that Canadians want to see, not only at the Supreme Court, but across every level of court. And obviously the dynamics around representation across the country, gender balance and the like. I mean, there are a lot of things that go into this decision.
Est-ce qu'il aurait dû faire face à ses pairs au Conseil canadien, attendre l'enquête plutôt que de démissionner avant qu'on ait les faits sur tout ce qui s'est passé?
Mais écoute, c'est une décision, comme j'avais déjà mentionné, c'est une décision très, très personnellement pour le juge Russell Brown. Il y a des sensibilités, comme j'avais juste expliqué à votre collègue ici. Il y a plein de facteurs qui influençaient les décisions de le gouvernement, comment on peut nominer un individu qui a les plus hautes qualifications dans le contexte de juridique. Qu'est-ce que c'est les valeurs, qu'est-ce que c'est les principes, est-ce que le juge nouveau peut écrire des décisions qui naviguent des principes qui est vraiment complexes, mais dans une façon qui est accessible à la Canadienne. Ça, c'est un nouveau tendance qu'on a besoin dans des juristes. Donc, on va voir qu'est-ce que c'est les prochaines étapes. Oui? And then I've got to do a vote. Yep.
No problem. So can you guarantee those First Nations will have the money they need at the end of the month to keep the lights on and keep police in their communities?
That's absolutely what we're working on right now. 24/7. I have been on the phone with Chief Kailuu. I have said to him that we are in solutions mode, that intention has been communicated to them, or certainly is in the process of being communicated to them in writing, so that we can get funds flowing directly back into the community, so that we can get back to the table.
How did it even get to this point, though? I mean, why are we at the 11th hour and they're saying they're financing their police operations with a line of credit before you're getting involved?
Yeah, and I want to make it abundantly clear that that is unacceptable. And as I said earlier, that I am not pleased at all with the state of negotiations. It is not the convention for ministers to become directly involved in the negotiations. We have delegates and proxies with regards to that, but having heard from the community directly, I share a number of the concerns that have been relayed to me, and now we've rolled up our sleeves and we're involved. And first things first, let's get funding flowing back to the community as quickly as possible. Then we'll get parties back to the table negotiating in good faith so that we can take take the next steps to reconciliation. Merci beaucoup.
Hi, Minister. Got to ask you, water bombers, a national fleet of water bombers, should they be folded into Transport Canada or DFO's fleets, since you have an air force, so to speak, for fisheries and Coast Guard? What do you think?
Well, what I think is I was really pleased at the type of assistance that the Coast Guard was able to provide with the Nova Scotia fires in particular, and if there needs to be a review of the collective assets, provincial, federal, that's never a bad thing, but we were able to provide a number of helicopters, a number of command units, large command units, as well as comfort stations for firefighters and crew, and help with evacuations. So it's been an important part of what Coast Guard has contributed in the last few weeks.
There's a lot of provincial jurisdiction when it comes to fires. I mean, with your family's business, trees and so on. Do you think you're well acquainted with the issue? Should it remain a provincial issue? Because each province deals with its fires and then they just trade aircraft as they need to? Or?
Well, I've seen very good collaboration between the provinces and the federal government, whether it was in British Columbia or more recently out east. So I'm not, I don't want to say anything that would indicate a lack of confidence. I think we have open doors of communication, and the federal government has been very responsive to requests from the provinces.
And do you see a need for just more aircraft in the country to help fight these fires?
I think it's not a bad idea to review the pattern of heat and fires because we know that this is not necessarily a one-time thing. And so if this trend continues, what might that mean in terms of resources that would be required to respond?
Appreciate you stopping. Thank you.
Yeah,
good to
thanks.
see you. Do you think that there should be a national fleet of water bombers to augment what Newfoundland and Labrador has? Do you think we're at that point, or do you think provinces can just handle it?
I think that's something that needs to be looked at, and I think the federal government needs to commit to being ready for fires and make sure the provinces are all prepared.
So a national fleet, what do you think?
We're analyzing that right now. Thank you.
Who should follow David Johnston? What do you think?
Superman.
Do you think there's going to be consensus?